Hello everyone, this is Glenda and welcome back to Creative Grandma. It's Stitch of the Week time, and this week's stitch is the thermos stitch. It's pattern number 87, and this is a free pattern on my website. Just go to creativegrandma.net, click on Stitch of the Week at the top of the web page, and it'll take you to all the Stitch of the Week patterns I have available. They're all free. You just click on the stitch that you want and you can download it right to your computer. Now this stitch here was a special request from one of my subscribers who asked if I could do a video and show you how to make this stitch. Again, if you can single crochet, you can do this stitch. The nice thing about this stitch is it's very thick, it's very dense. A lot of people love it for pot holders, cushions, anything like that where you want a really heavy, thick fabric. So let me show you my samples first. The first sample I have is made using Karen's Simply Soft, and this is stripes, and this is Times Square. This is color number 19006. So beautiful, beautiful yarn with the pinks and blues and purples. And let me see if you can see it a little bit better. I had a little knot in my yarn right here, so please excuse that. Here's the other side. And if you look, you can kind of see how thick this is. Really nice, thick fabric. So that's the one in the multicolor. And then I also did my classic white. So if you look at the classic white, you can kind of see the thermo a little bit better. You can kind of see little holes, like if you're familiar with long underwear, how it has that little bit of a weave texture to it. You'll see little tiny holes, and it just creates that double thickness of the fabric, and it's just really, really nice. So that's the classic white. This is Red Heart Super Saver. And then I did another sample, and I change colors every 3 rows. And you can see on this side, the purple is the dominant color. If you turn it over on the other side, you can see that the white becomes the dominant color. And I think you can see, I'm going to put it up close to the camera, you can kind of see right down in there, it's almost double layered. So I hope you can see that. If you look right here, you can look right down into those stitches and see stitches under it. It's just a really nice textured heavy fabric. And this sample was made using 4 medium weight Stitch Studio Basics in purple and then white. So I thought it was very interesting how it looks so different on each side. This side is dominant with the color you start with, and when you flip it over, then it becomes dominant with that second color. So you kind of get 2 looks in one. It's a reversible pattern. So now let's get on to the details about the stitch. Now this stitch pattern has no multiple. You can chain an even number, you can chain an odd number, it doesn't matter. You just chain however long you want. It doesn't matter with this stitch. Now I made my samples using a size 10J 6mm hook, and I found that if you go with too small of a hook, it's going to be really dense. And this is really tight. It's really thick, but it still has a little bit of, I don't want to say drape, because it just has a nice feel to it with this size hook. If you're using a 4 medium weight yarn, I would suggest a size J10 6mm hook. So you can maybe go up a size. I mean, I just used this size and I think it worked out wonderful. Now let me grab my tape measure, because if anybody wants to make anything, I can give you kind of a good stitch count on here. So I'm just going to start here, and let's see. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 and a half stitches. So I'd say 12 stitches equal 4 inches. It comes right in the center of that stitch. So that gives you an idea of how long to make your chain. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 stitches would be about 4 inches. So you would just take 12 stitches times however many 4 inches you want, and that kind of gives you a baseline of how many chains you need. So I'm going to be using Stitch Studio Classic by Nicole, and I'm using color number Soft Gold. It's a beautiful gold color. I already have my yarn attached to my hook. I just tie a double knot. Now with this stitch pattern, you can chain an even number or an odd number. It really doesn't matter. So I'm going to start with a chain 11. Yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook, that's 1. Yarn over, pull through, that's 2. Yarn over, pull through, that's 3. Continue until you have a total of 11 chains, and I'll be back to get row 1 started. I have my 11 chains made, and what we're going to do for row 1 is when you look at your chain and you turn your chain over, let me take my hook out so you can see better. When you turn your chain over, you'll see these back bumps, and they're just raised just ever so slightly right in the back of the center of your chain, and this is what we're going to be working in. So let me put my hook back in there. So to start row 1, we're going to skip the first chain. We're going to go into the back bump of the second chain on our hook. So you're just going to turn your work, and the back bump is right behind that chain. Insert underneath that bump, yarn over, pull through that bump stitch, yarn over, and pull through 2. You just made your first single crochet. Here's our next chain. We're going to turn our work, look for that back bump. You can see it sticking up right here. We're going to insert underneath that back bump and work a single crochet. You're going to find your next chain, and if you have to, pull that chain so you can see your stitch, because sometimes our yarn wants to kind of go back, so just stretch it if you have to so you can see really well your stitches. Turn your chain, look for that back bump, right here it is. I'm just going underneath it, and it does help if you chain very loosely on your foundation chain. Insert underneath that bump and work your single crochet. Pull on the chain, find your next chain, it's here, turn it slightly, and you'll see your back bump right here. Just insert underneath that back bump right in the center of the back of the chain and work your single crochet. And you're just going to repeat that across. Find your next chain, turn your chain, look for that back bump, insert underneath that bump, and work a single crochet. Find your next chain, insert into that back bump, and work a single crochet. I'm just going to go ahead and work across the rest of the row, working a single crochet in the back bump. Find your next chain, look for that back bump, insert underneath that back bump, and work a single crochet. Insert underneath the back bump of the next chain and work a single crochet. Now when you get over to the last chain, that might be a little more difficult because the back bump wants to go right down inside that last chain. So what I do, here is your back bump. It's the center strand of that last stitch, that last chain. I insert my hook from top to bottom between the front loop of the chain. I go underneath that center strand, I turn my hook, and I grab that center strand and come up between the center and the last loop. And then I work my single crochet. Now, we chained 11, so you should have 10 single crochet. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Whatever you chain, you will have one less stitch. So we chained 11, we have 10 single crochet. If you make a larger afghan and you chain 100, you'll end up with 99 single crochet stitches. So I'll be right back and we'll get row 2 started. For row 2, we're going to chain 1, and we're going to turn our work. So for row 2, what you're going to do is you're going to end up working sideways because you need to go into the back loop of the stitch, and then you need to come down into the front loop of the one underneath. So you will insert, when you're looking at your work this way, into the back loop. So this is your front loop, this is your back loop. You're going to go into that back loop, and then you're going to follow that stitch down, and you're going to go into the front loop on the base of that foundation chain that we just worked, the base of row 1, and you're just going to insert into that bar. So when you're working your stitches across the row, you will be inserting your hook actually into the back loop, because when you look at your work, this is your stitch, this is the front, that's the back. So you're inserting your hook into that back loop and then the front loop directly below in that base of the foundation chain. So now let's start row 2. We already turned our work, so we're going to skip our chain 1. This is our chain 1 space right here. We're going to skip that, and you want to go directly into that first stitch right here. You're going to go into the back loop of that first single crochet, and then you're going to follow it down into that front loop at the base of the foundation row. You're going to yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over and pull through 2. You just made your single crochet. You're going to look for your next single crochet. It's right here. Here's your front loop and here's your back loop. Insert underneath the back loop of that next stitch. Turn your work sideways. You're going to look for that next front loop of the stitch on the base of the foundation row, right at the very bottom of the work where you see these stitches. So yarn over, and you're going to pull through those 2 stitches, yarn over and pull through 2. You just made your single crochet. You're going to look for your next stitch. Here's your next stitch. You're going to insert into the back loop. You're going to turn your work sideways, and you're going to take your hook directly down, straight down into the front loop. You have 2 loops. You have the back loop and the front loop. You're just going right into the front loop only. And then you're going to work your single crochet. Yarn over, pull through those 2 loops, those 2 stitches, yarn over and pull through 2 loops. Now what this is doing is it's creating a ridge, and this is what creates the stitch for when you turn your work and you work the next row. This is where you're going to come down to that second part to make that stitch. So we're going to just work the stitch, and then you'll realize what you're doing as you're making the stitch each row. Find your next stitch. Here's the front loop, here's the back loop. Insert into that back loop. Turn your work sideways, take that hook straight down directly below that stitch you're working into the front loop of that stitch below. Yarn over and work your single crochet. And we're just going to repeat that across. I'm going to work this all the way over just so you can get the idea of how you're doing this stitch. Here's your next stitch. This is your work facing you. This is your front loop. That's your back loop. Insert into the back loop. Turn your work towards you and sideways. Take that hook directly straight down into the front loop of the stitch below and work your single crochet. Turn your work back up so you can see your next stitch. Here's the front loop. There's the back loop. Insert into the back loop. Turn your work sideways, take that hook directly below into the front loop of that stitch directly below the one you're working in. Yarn over, pull through those 2 loops, yarn over and pull through 2 loops. You made your single crochet. And it may get a little confusing when you're looking sideways at your work, but that's the only way you can do it is sideways in order to see those stitches. So what I say is just keep turning it back up so you're not getting confused. When you go to start that stitch, turn that back up so your work is facing you, and then look for the top of your stitch, insert into the back loop, then turn your work sideways, take your hook directly below into that front loop of the stitch below the current stitch you're working, and then work your single crochet. We only have a few more stitches to go, so we're just going to go ahead and do them. Turn your work back up. Here's your next stitch. You can tell because you have your horizontal bar. Look for the front loop and the back loop. Insert underneath the back loop. Turn your work sideways. Take your hook straight down to the front loop of the stitch below the current stitch you're working, and then work your single crochet. Turn your work back up. Here's your next stitch. Here's your front loop, your back loop. Insert into the back loop. Turn your work sideways. Take your hook directly below into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on. Yarn over, pull through those 2 loops, yarn over and pull through 2 loops. So I'm over at my last stitch. Turn your work so it's facing you, and you can see right here's our front loop and there's our back loop. This is our last stitch. So we're going under the back loop of that last stitch, and then we're going to come straight down into the front loop of the last stitch and work a single crochet. And then you can double count to make sure we have 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. It may help if you have a little trouble with your end or your starting stitch to go ahead and mark in the front and the last stitch in each row to help you carry it up to keep an even row. So let's do row 3. We're going to chain 1 and turn. And we're just going to repeat the process. So to start row 3, we're going to skip our chain 1 space. We're going to insert into the back loop of the first stitch, and then this gets a little easier because you can see our stitches are very easy to see now. They're right directly below and they match up. So insert into the front loop of the stitch directly below the one you're working in, and then yarn over, pull through those 2 stitches, and yarn over and pull through 2. You just worked your single crochet. Again, the first 3 rows are the hardest because what you're doing is you're pulling this up and you're getting your work ready to double. It's kind of like rolling up on itself. So once you get row 3 done, it will become so much easier for you to do. Find the back loop of your next stitch. So the best thing to do is hold that work, and it kind of looks like a V. If you look, here's our front row of our stitches, and it has kind of a groove in it, almost like a V in it. You can see here's the front of the work, and kind of here's the double back side. I hope that's showing up right. So then you turn your work towards you. Here's your front loop and there's your back loop of that first stitch. So you're going into the back loop, and then you're going into the front loop of the stitch directly below, and you're going to work your single crochet. Find your next stitch. Here it is. You're going into the back loop and then straight down to the stitch below and go into the front loop and work your single crochet. And again, you can kind of see how this is double. Here's the front and kind of here's the back, and we're pulling this together and it creates a double thickness. So here's your work. If you're looking at it, here's how it looks if it's facing you. And when you're working these first 3 rows, you have to turn your work in order to see it. So here's the front loop, here's the back loop. Insert into that back loop, and then go directly below into the front loop in that stitch directly below the stitch you're working on, and then work your single crochet. And it's kind of pulling those two layers together. So here's your next stitch. Insert into the back loop of that next stitch, and then go directly below into the front loop of the stitch below the current stitch you're working on, and work your single crochet. And I know I'm repeating myself with each stitch, but this is kind of how you learn with repetition, so I am sorry about that. I did try to make the sample short so I didn't drive you crazy with repeating myself so much. Here's the next stitch. Insert into the back loop. Take your hook straight down into the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on, and insert into that front loop and work your single crochet. Insert into the back loop of the next stitch. Take your hook directly down into the front loop of the stitch below and work a single crochet. And this is all there is to this pattern. It gets easier once you get row 3 done. Insert into the back loop of the next stitch. Take your hook directly below the current stitch you're working on into the front loop, and then work your single crochet. And again, all you're doing is you're pulling these two layers together. Insert into the back loop of that next stitch. Take your hook directly below into the front loop of the next stitch, directly below the current stitch you're working on, and work a single crochet. And now we're over to our last stitch. And I know it gets easier once you get the third row done, but if you look at your work, you can see you still have one more horizontal bar going across. You have the one in the back that forms your last stitch. And if you see the rainbow bar, this is what I call the rainbow bar. When you get to the end of the work and you see this bar going around like a horseshoe across the end of your work, then you know this is your last stitch. So insert into the back loop of that last stitch, and then drop your hook down into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on, and work a single crochet. And that is how you do the thermos stitch. So now I'm going to show you how I change color, and when I change color, I'm going to show you how to do the finishing row. And then the finishing row, when you do this stitch pattern, it leaves a ridge. And when you look at the stitch pattern, it becomes, the ridge disappears. So when you finish the work, you don't want a ridge on the last part of your pattern or whatever you're making. So I'll show you how to finish this pattern so you don't see that ridge. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to fasten off. Now I'm going to take my hook out and I'm going to pull that loop out. I'm going to pull my last stitch out, and I'm going to insert into the back loop and into the front loop directly below, and I'm going to yarn over and pull through those two loops. So now if you want to change colors, let me just grab this purple since I have it here. I leave about a 3 to 4 inch length, and what I do is I would just pull my new color through. We're going to start our finishing row with a chain 1. We're going to insert our hook under both loops of that first stitch. I'm going to grab these two ends and kind of hold them out of the way, but I'm going to be working my stitches right over these yarn ends, and I'm going to weave them in and you won't even see it. So we inserted our hook under the top two loops of that first stitch, and now we're going directly into the loop directly below that stitch in the front loop. So when you're working the finishing row, you have the loop on your hook, you have the front loop and the back loop on your hook. This is squeezed together tightly, and then you have the loop from the stitch below. So you have 4 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over, you're going to pull through 3 loops on your hook, and you'll have 2 loops remaining. Yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. You're going to find your next stitch. You're going to insert your hook under both loops of that next stitch, and then you're going to go directly below into the front of that stitch, directly below the current stitch you're working on. Now here you can see the 4 stitches easier. Here's the loop on your hook. There's the 2 loops of that first stitch, the front and back loop, and then there's the front loop of the stitch below. I'm going to take my yarn ends, pull them over here, and then I'm going to yarn over, pull through, and then I have 2 loops on my hook, yarn over and pull through 2. You're doing the same process, only you're going under both loops instead of the back loop. So you're doing the same technique, only you're going through the whole stitch of those 2 loops. Insert under the 2 loops of that next stitch, go straight down into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on, and then I bring my ends up over the top of my hook, yarn over, pull through the stitch, and then yarn over and pull through 2. Now I'm just going to clip my ends because I think it's getting in my way of really showing you what I do, but that's how I weave my ends in. And then if you look, you can't see your ends because they're weaved in under your stitches. So you'll just continue across your row, insert under both loops, go directly below into the front loop of that stitch, directly below the current stitch you're working on, and work a single crochet. Insert under both loops of the next stitch, take your hook straight down into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working, and work a single crochet. Insert under both loops of the next stitch, take your hook and take it straight down into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on, and work a single crochet. Insert under both loops of the next stitch, take your hook straight down into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on, and work a single crochet. We only have 3 stitches to go. Insert under both loops of the next stitch, insert into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working on, and work a single crochet. Insert under both loops of the next stitch, take your hook straight down into the front loop of the stitch directly below the current stitch you're working, and work a single crochet. We're over at our last stitch. Now with the last stitch, you have to make sure that you have the front and the back loop. Now this one, the back loop wants to hide down in there, so really pay attention that you have it in the right stitch. So if you can't find your stitch one row below, it could be pulled up because you're pulling this work up. So here is the last stitch, and you can see how close these are together. They're almost on top of each other. So you're just going underneath the top 2 strands of that last stitch, and then the stitch right below is almost right on top of it, and just go underneath that front loop, yarn over, and work that single crochet. Now I'm going to fasten off, and then I'll show you how your ridge disappeared for that last row. So you see no ridge any longer, and when you turn your work over, your ridge is gone as well. And that is how it looks on all the samples when you do that finishing row. It just adds a really nice look, because you do not want a ridge when your pattern, the ridges disappear. So it's very important to do that finishing row where it gets rid of that ridge. So this again is the thermo stitch. This pattern is available on my website, creativegrandma.net. You can get on there. Again, all my Stitch of the Weeks are free, immediate downloads. You can download one or you can download them all. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial of the thermo stitch. It's quite an easy stitch, and like I said, the bigger your project gets, once you get past row 3, that's where you're pulling that work together and creating that double effect. And it takes you until row 3 to get that technique of getting those double layers pulled together. So take your time until you get through row 3. And again, if you're having trouble with that first stitch or that last stitch, once you complete that stitch, put that stitch marker in there, because you want nice straight sides going up your work. And this is what it looks like. You want those nice straight sides. So that's it. Thank you everyone for stopping by. I appreciate you coming back time and time again to watch the Stitch of the Week. And please make sure you hit that like button and that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the Stitch of the Week or any of the crochet fun. Happy crocheting, everyone.